What I wanted to talk to you all about this morning was how impossible it seems to swim up waterfalls. But I think when we've got brain injury, it's just like swimming up waterfalls. So here we've got a waterfall, and I know lots of us, we seem to go along in this stream of life and everything seems okay. But if we have a brain injury, it's just like we've been dumped down a waterfall. Next. Next slide. For people who've heard me talk before, I often say I'm only here because of a piece of string. I've only managed to find a way up the waterfall because of a bit of string. My mum's love was growing roses, and one morning we found a rose bush had blown over, and we needed a bit of string to tie it back up to its stake. Well, there was no string in the kitchen drawer, and no string in the back shed, and no string in the garage. But I wonder if you can imagine what I might have found at age 5 in the gutter on my way home from school. I found a bit of string, and I gave it to my mum, who totally overacted. So I thought that at the age of 5, the thing my mum loved best in the whole world were pieces of string. And whenever I went, I had my eyes peeled for string. And I picked up that string each time and I gave it to mum until we had a back shed festooned with string. And that's a really important message for all of us, that if we know what we're looking for, we can find it. If we don't know what we're looking for, we can't find anything, but we can find string. Next. So my life had been just like a beautiful river, and I'd had a wonderful journey with just a few little mini waterfalls or challenges. Next. Next slide. Thanks, Peter. So with my brain injury 30 years ago, from a horrific car accident, taking a pole through the driver's door, I had no memory. I couldn't walk, talk or think properly. I was paralysed down my left side. I had no balance, double vision, which I've still got, and difficulty with words and particularly with numbers. Thanks. Next. My damaged brain and body were very obvious to anyone, but not my damaged spirit and hope and confidence. Next. Thanks, Peter. I was sucked into a whirlpool. I hated myself. I was lost. I was trapped. I was helpless. I was hopeless, and I was fragile. And I was isolated, and I felt I'd totally lost everything. I'd totally lost my life as I knew it. Next. Thanks, Peter. After the whirlpool, there was a criminal court case, which was just dreadful. And seeing the man who'd done this to me, my hatred was using up all my energy hating this man. Next. In this whirlpool, I had no control at all. I had no control of my body or my words. And I had so many frightening doctor's visits for the civil court case, and so many tests, and 3 IQ tests in a month, and you all know what it's like. It's horrible. Next. I had no control as I didn't understand brain injury. I expected the experts to fix me. So I didn't have any information 30 years ago about brain injury. There was no internet. There was no books written. I couldn't find anything. But eventually I had to learn to acknowledge my difficulties and find ways to fix myself and fix my life. Next. Thanks, Peter. It seemed hopeless. I thought I could never be saved from the deep water. I was told I'd improve for 6 months, and by that time I still was jabbing my eye when I tried to eat with a fork. I was still dribbling all my dinner down my front, and I felt really horrible to think this was the most improvement I'd make. And then I was told I'd improve for 2 years, and that was it. And then I'd plateau out. What a stupid word. So it gave me no hope of ever recapturing my life, and none of the specialists I saw gave me any hope of ever having any sort of life. Thanks, Peter. I was drowning. I was disempowered by all those horrible tests. I was really ashamed because I was so dumb and stupid. I'd been a school teacher and I'd done maths with my kids for so many years and I was a whiz at it. And I couldn't even add up 1 and 3. I wouldn't have known. So I felt really, really stupid. So it meant I lost all confidence. I felt very unlovely and unlovable. And I was isolated. We live in Eltham and I was high on a hillside and I was just totally isolated on this hillside. So it was really, really bad. Next. I desperately needed a lifesaver to help me understand the challenges. Test results need to be explained and what we can do to improve it. No one gave me any. They gave me the test and obviously they put it away in their filing drawer. They didn't know how to explain to me what I could do to improve. So I believe that mild ABI, plateauing in the 2 to 5 year rule, and being told you will never ever do something should be banned. I think it's bad. And I've gone on this long journey for 30 years to try and get those words banned. Next. I needed a lifesaver, and my lifesavers were my family, particularly my son Rob, who patted me when I wept and thought I'd never get a life again. And I don't know if any of you ever knew Maureen Malloy, a wonderful neuropsych who has since died, but she was wonderful because she gave me a test and she explained to me what it meant and how I could improve. Next, thanks. So swimming upstream to a new normal reminds me of fish ladders. Now, I don't know if you've heard of fish ladders, but I think it's a really cute idea. Steps called fish ladders were made in France in the 17th century to allow fish to swim up waterfalls. Next. Fish could swim up a small slope, have a rest, and tackle the next effort to swim up another small slope. Thank you. Next. Some of my ladders were, firstly, realising hating others was a luxury I couldn't afford, and realising and admitting that I was jealous of everyone because they were normal and I wasn't. Next. Learning to stop cursing myself. I kept calling myself, you bumbling idiot. I had to stop being my own worst enemy and become my own best friend. Next. Thanks, Peter. Learning about faulty thinking. Now, I don't know if you know all about this, but catastrophizing, making a catastrophe out of something small, minimizing, should or all of nothing, or overgeneralization, or jumping to conclusions and mind reading. I was absolutely brilliant at all that faulty thinking. And I think that perhaps some of you might have that faulty thinking too. We can't help it. But often my fear was false evidence appearing real. So by catastrophizing, I thought that was evidence and I thought it meant it was real. And that was really scary to be like that. Next, thank you. I found comfort in nature. I loved feeding the birds. Our dog was by my side all the time. And eventually I started to achieve small things like being unpacked the dishwasher and actually being able to put the spoons and forks in the right place in the drawer. And I had to tell myself this is a good thing to happen. If I could make soup for my family or a cake. And gradually by little small improvements like going up a fish ladder, it gave me more confidence. The more things I found I could do, the more I could grow and go up that fish ladder. Thanks. Next. Next, thanks. So way back then with my one finger and my double vision, my son's bought a computer and put it on really big print. And I printed away with my one finger and I said to my husband, darling, I've written a book. And he said, no, you haven't. And I said, yes, I have. And by quite a miracle, I gave it to a literary agent. And because it was probably one of the first books in the world to be written by someone with brain injury, now there's lots, but then there wasn't, Penguin decided to sign me up. So my first application was good and I wrote doing up buttons, Penguin Australia, because I didn't want anyone to ever feel as lost and scared and bewildered as I was. Next. Thank you. Peter, next. Hi there, Peter. Beaut. So trying to be a lifesaver, I've written books and articles to help people get out of deep water or understand. I did quite a lot of writing for the brain injury journey in the States, and after my PhD I wrote Unlocking My Brain, and then I did an academic book because my main thing has been trying to talk to the academics to make them understand what it's like from our perspective. I did a Butts talk for Henry Stewart Talks, which had to be used for people with doctoral degrees to go up to the next level. So that was really Butte. And so I was really pleased to be able to try and do these things to help people understand brain injury. Next. Thanks, Peter. So I've had a few honours along the way, which was quite amazing. And as a lifesaver, I've been busy with talks to help people get out of their deep water. And there's just a few of the talks I've done, so I've been pretty busy going around trying to help people understand brain injury. Next. Thanks, Peter. At the rehabilitation hospital, we all walk funny, we all talk funny, and we think funny, but it's not funny. Next. It's not funny that we can't see properly and we can't understand. Next. And it's not funny that life is like walking on a tightrope for us. It's very difficult when we lose our balance, when we don't know what's happening. Next. It's not funny that we lose our sense of direction. I was hopeless, my sense of direction, and we'd lose our direction in life and have to find a new direction. Next. Peter, next.
It just takes a little while sometimes.
Oh, does it? Sorry about that. I'm always too fast. My new direction was going back to teaching, but because I couldn't see properly, and I had my eye patch on and I had my walking stick and I was pretty hopeless, but the school was wonderful and kept me on, and in the end I took 4,000 thinking and philosophy workshops to help the children understand things, because I realised that the reason I knew to look for string was because my darling dad had treated me as an intellectual equal. And from a very early age, he'd take me on thinking walks, and we'd walk along the beach and he'd talk about opera or politics or current affairs, and I didn't have a clue what Dad was talking about. It went right over my head. But somehow that lit a little light inside me, so I realised that we could think things through and improve. So my book, Chasing Ideas, came out, and I wouldn't have been able to write a book. And when I took a lesson, I'd make it up. And I'd maybe put a can of baked beans on the table and say to the children, our lesson is here. And they'd, of course, be full of curiosity. And I'd just say to them, what story has beans in it? And they'd say, Jack and the Beanstalk. And I'd say, I was wondering, was Jack good or bad? And the first child would maybe say, Jack was good because he killed the giant. And the next child said, does that mean it's good to kill bad people? And the third child, and these were 5-year-olds, the third child said, how do we know who's good or bad? So with the older children, I didn't know how to write. So I'd try and write on the blackboard, and I couldn't spell properly. And so the kids would take the chalk out of my fingers and write. They'd say, for heaven's sake, Mrs. D, you know you can't write. And they'd write for me. So it was really interesting to see this all happening. And so I invented what I called handy thinking. To solve problems, we have to imagine a pigeon sitting on our thumb. We have to pigeonhole the issue. What's it like? Our pointer finger reminds us to point to or find the facts. Our middle finger is in the middle of our hand, like our heart's in the middle of our body. And that reminds us to find the feelings. And our ring finger is our judging finger. And we have to find the good and the bad and the interesting things about that problem. And if our little finger was like the others, it'd need to grow. Growth. For me, growth stands for great, original, wise thinking when we start to unpack ideas. Peter, thank you. Next. So my book and talk seem to be helping people understand, and also professionals, but how could I help professionals gain greater insight into lived experience of brain injury? So rather stupidly, when I was 63, I thought, well, I need to do a PhD because that's going to be the only way professionals will really listen to me. Next, thank you, Peter. So it was rather a silly thing to do when I couldn't see properly. But I thought, unless I do a PhD, nothing will happen. So I had two beautiful flan-tailed doves. You can see them there. There's Lovey-Dovey and Cloud. And I don't know if you can imagine what everyone gave me. I don't know if you've got an eye patch, but if everyone gives you, they think it's funny, they give you parrots. So you're a pirate. And I sort of was a bit sick of parrots, and my son was working at Montserrat. And he said to me, Mum, there's some fan-tailed doves. Do you want them? And I thought, oh, how marvellous to have doves, the symbol of peace. Yes, please. So I brought home these funny-looking ragged birds. They had all their feathers pecked out, and I'd wrap them up in a towel and put them on my knee when I was tapping away with my one finger to write my book, Doing Up Buttons. By the way, I've written all my books and all my papers and everything with just one finger. And I can't see the screen very well, so I just look down at the keys. And I have left neglect, so I generally, often in each row, there'd maybe be 4 or 5 mistakes with the wrong letter. So it was a bit of a task. But these darling birds were beautiful, and they couldn't walk properly, and they couldn't fly properly. And I thought, you poor darlings, you're just like me. I'm not a proper person, and you're not a proper bird. And I used to take them outside when I'd have a break, and I'd try to give them flying lessons, but they wouldn't take off. And then I learnt the these fan-tailed pigeons had been bred with a special purpose to go in the air and make a commotion above their house so the flying pigeons would have a way to come home. And I thought, that's lovely, that's wonderful, it fits my book. I only hope my books can go in the air and make a commotion and make people pay attention to brain injury and how devastating it can be. So I had this beautiful cage, and I'd take the birds in the cage when I'd go on Bert Newton or Kerry Ann to talk about my book, because I couldn't remember what the book was about, and that helped remind me. And I'd write cues on my fingers, and I'd wash my hands and lose them, so I was a bit hopeless. But I'd stuff them into the cage and take them along with taxi to the telly studio. And I had the cage in my study, and I used to think, brain injury is just like being in a cage and the key's been thrown away. Thanks, Peter. Next. So you can see Lovey-Dovey there on our deck, and also the travelling case for them, and it was very handy. It was really handy. So I tried to make a way to talk to people about brain injury so they understood more about brain injury by using my bird cage. And I called it Keys to the Brain Injury Cage. And you can see on the left my walking stick, and I hung on it all sorts of statements that people had talked to me about, or experiences I had, of the difficulties and differences we feel when we've got brain injury. And then in the cage, locked in the cage, is how those things make us feel. And that makes us feel very bad and sad and mad. And you can see the pole of the flying pig there. It was a pole, and on it I stuck all the talk about cards of things that people had told me about that helped them improve from having brain injury. And up the top, it's just hidden. You can see a flying pig, and it had flywire pig wings. And I was really fascinated. A darling lady who was blind felt all these things, and she said, Chris, that's never going to take off because its wings are made of flywire. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? Next, thank you, Peter. So it was quite a business trying to get all this organised. So I thought, how could I talk to people with brain injury without making them feel bad? I wanted to use their eyes so they could start to see things differently. Thanks, Peter. Because seeing things differently, it can change, and to use their heart to reflect on how they felt about things. Thanks, Peter. And also their funny bone, their wonderful sense of humour. And I must confess, I am gobsmacked by how much humour and poetry and intelligence and wise things come from people with brain injury. And often they don't have the chance with just a questionnaire to let that come out. Thank you, Peter. So their funny bone was very important. So first of all, our differences and difficulties can put us in the cage. Thanks, Peter. You can see them there. And I wanted to make them talk about cards. And then how we feel about our differences and difficulties can lock us in the cage. Thanks, Peter. But there are many keys that can release us from the cage. And you can see there some of the things that were helping people. Curiosity, proof, religion. Well, it was interesting with religion. Some people said that, that religion was both the worst and the best thing, because some people felt really guilty and that God was punishing them. And on the other hand, some people felt religion was what kept them going. So talking and gardening and wisdom and curiosity and proof and animals and sunshine. Thanks, Peter. There are many things that can help us feel better. So what did I find? The things that locked people in the cage were feeling afraid, ashamed and isolated. They were sad and disappointed, sad and distressed, and sad and depressed. And they often talked about the difference in all these words and how all those things encapsulated being sad. But also people felt angry and mad and frustrated and mad and crazy. I felt crazy when I was walking down the street and I came to a set of lights, and when the lights turned green, that told me to drop my handbag. I felt really stupid then. I felt stupid when I was waiting at the boom gates for a train to go by, and when the boom gate came down, to me it was like being a child again in a running race. So I ran across the train tracks in front of the train. And then I suddenly realised this isn't exactly what you should do, and I felt crazy. And the feeling bad. I felt so guilty. I wasn't a proper mother, a proper wife, a proper teacher. I wasn't proper anything. So I felt guilty about absolutely everything. I felt bad and stupid. I felt so stupid and dumb. I was no longer the old me, and I knew I'd lost the old me forever, and I felt really bad. Thanks, Peter. Next one. So it's really awful when you're feeling sad, mad and bad. You really do feel bad. And of course we need a lot to help us get out of that. So it was very interesting. Rehab was just one of the 60 talk about cards. And more than half the participants in this study with ABI felt it didn't suit them, which is quite scary. And some of them became quite hostile about what happened to them in rehab, and I felt a little bit upset about what had happened to me in rehab too. They felt the loss of choice, the fact of being disempowered, for the person who was in control to have the power and they had none, for all the tests, the loss of hope from the 2-year rule, and it still happens 30 years later, being told that professionals don't know what it's really like, and that they weren't a textbook case, but they were treated like one. So it's very interesting. I can go along to professionals, and because I've done a jolly PhD and I've got this information, I can quite forcefully tell them things aren't working, that we need something different. Thanks, Peter. But that was quite a scary thing. I hadn't intended to even look at rehab, and over half my comments were about rehab. But the most wonderful thing, the keys to the cage, and the most incredible finding in this study was 3 people made the same statements in different words, but that brain injury was both the worst and the best thing that had happened to them in their life. They now appreciate being alive. They're aware of their strengths and weaknesses. and they feel wise. Thanks, Peter. If only we could help people to experience those feelings. So the keys to life challenges are to never, 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 ever give up. Thanks, Peter. I've never given up, and I think so many people never give up, and that's how we get somewhere. So to help us leap up waterfalls, we need hope. That hope can come in many ways. It can be jolly determination that I'm going to find something out. For me, it was my blind determination that I had to find ways to help other people. Of course, back then they didn't have your wonderful ABIYs. If that was there, I wouldn't have done any of this work at all. I wouldn't have done any of that talking. I wouldn't have done a PhD. Your ABIYs is just the most fabulous thing. And obviously people had to be determined to make that happen. On the other hand, sometimes we need to ignore the problem. And other times we have to have wishful thinking and just hope things will go well. Thanks, Peter. So it's interesting that hope can be made up of many things, and that can get us up one fish ladder, and we can take a little swim there and get our breath to go up the next fish ladder. And that's love. What got people going and getting up that waterfall was the love of family and friends, of the importance of understanding and empathy and encouragement, because often when we're just bumbling around, it's very hard to encourage us or see the little steps we've taken that do help us. Finding things we love to do, to find hobbies or things we love to do. For me, it was finding just happiness sitting in the sun with a cup of coffee. And I couldn't taste the coffee and I couldn't smell the coffee, but just that warmth, I thought, oh, that's not too bad. And from that, I started to write a list of all the things that weren't too bad. And that really helped me. And I was fascinated that everyone said the thing that helped them was helping others. So that's the most wonderful, wonderful thing. Thanks, Peter. It's really hard getting up each of these fish ladders. Now, the third thing that seemed to be helping people was learning to face the facts. I was interested that one darling gentleman said, you know, Chris, I've had brain injury for 7 years, but an hour spent with a birdcage has let me accept that I do have brain injury. So we need to understand, and it's wonderful there's so much information out there to help us understand, because I didn't understand and I thought, well, I've gone mad, and I know what they do with mad people, they lock them up. So I had to pretend that I understood when I didn't. I didn't understand when from hospital with my multiple breaks and my brain injury and I couldn't walk properly and all, the doctors and nurses all said, Chris, you need to go to a rehab. And I thought, well, I don't need to go to rehab, because in my mind, the only people who had rehab were soldiers. And I knew I wasn't a soldier, so I certainly didn't need rehab. And I insisted on going home. But that just shows you how stupid I was and how little understanding and how little they'd explained to me what brain injury was and how I could improve. So accepting the facts that we do have brain injury and we can start to find ways to help ourselves. And I don't think anyone can do it for us. I was told in rehab, now, Chris, you've got a brain injury, you won't remember anything, so you've got to have a notebook. And I thought, you tell me I've got to have a notebook? I'm not going to have a notebook. But I could show you in my study, I have a stack of exercise books this high of all the notes I've taken over the years, and that's really helped me. But I had to accept that I had brain injury and find out for myself. Now, resilience is really important, being able to pop back up when things seem so grim and we're down in that whirlpool. Having a positive attitude, which is really hard to have when you don't know who you are, but you somehow had to find some positive things. And of course, our sense of humour has been just fabulous in helping us to get up and understand the facts and accept things and be able to talk about things. Thank you, Peter. So, making progress, to realise brain injury is not all bad. So to be able to do normal things, to be able to return to work, to be able to go to and do study, to volunteer, to be able to get out and about, to be able to achieve hard things. And it was wonderful that lots of people had a survivor's high. When we survived this terrible thing, we managed to feel really high with being able to do it. Thank you. It's fascinating how we can gradually jump up. So I wrote Unlocking My Brain Through the Labyrinth of Acquired Brain Injury. And I realised from my study and writing my books and speaking to hundreds of people with brain injury, where I'd speak to a crowd of people with brain injury, hundreds of people at a time, and I'd say, put up your hand if you've done something that the doctors told you'd never do. And the hands all go up in the air. So the plasticity of the human brain, and now we know the brain is plastic and it can find new connections, plus the plasticity of the human spirit, boost the plasticity of human potential. Next, thank you. You can see a bit of string there and the button that stood for small things. Now it's interesting how a river cuts through rock, not because of its power, but because of its persistence. We must never, never, never give up. Thank you, Peter. You drown, not by falling into deep water, but by not finding a way to get yourself to the surface, to take a breath, to find ways to go with the flow until you can find a safe place. Thanks, Peter. I didn't drown because I found ways. I found all sorts of ways to help myself. I found ways to get up that next slope. What have I learnt in 30 years of working really hard? I've learnt that triumph is made up of two words, try and umph, and that hope stands for help other possibilities emerge. It's never the end. There's always another possibility that you can try that might help you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.